welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndall Curtis. The former Finance Minister, Lindsay Tanner, who wrote a book decrying the sideshow that he believes modern politics has become, created a sideshow of his own today with a new book of essays. He's critical of the decision in 2010 to dump Kelvin Rudd as leader, saying it was poll-driven. He's also critical of what he believes is a lack of ideas being generated from within inside the Labor movement. Joining me to discuss this and other issues of the day are Labor MP Kelvin Thomson and Liberal frontbencher Peter Dutton. Welcome to you both.
Good afternoon.
Thanks,
Lyndall.
We'll go first to Mr.
too,
Tanner. We'll go first to Mr. Tanner's comments and some of the reaction to them.
If you look back over the last 40 years, the big Labor reforms, whether it's Medicare, occupational superannuation, even things that didn't get there like the Republic, the Accord, all of these things have been largely incubated from within the wider Labor family. Yes, there have been other players, but they've been largely driven from within. That doesn't happen much these days, if at all. We now end up in a situation where, for example, the National Disability Insurance Scheme
That's the one obvious thing, isn't it?
Is a product, is a very good thing to be pursued, but it's been a product of external forces, political pressures from outside, and we outsource it to the Productivity Commission. To me, that's a stark difference.
I'm sure there's terrific analysis in Lindsay's book because Lindsay is very brainy, but it's got a bit too easy to write another book spelling out what's wrong with the battered old Australian Labor Party.
Lindsay Tanner has belled the cat about the contemporary Labor Party. It is a party which has lost its soul. A once great political party has basically become a squalid committee to re-elect Julia Gillard or whoever happens to be the leader at any particular time.
Kelvin, if we could go first to the point Mr. Tanner was making there about a failure within the Labor movement to come up with its own reform ideas, and the one he cites, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, he says was effectively outsourced to the Productivity Commission. As I remember it, that's an idea that came out of the 2020 summit. Did you outsource it?
Lyndall, this is an idea which has been around for some time. Indeed, during the Whitlam years, we had the proposal for no-fault accident compensation, and a lot of the proposals that came up during the Whitlam years were the product of Gough's own prodigious intellect. But the truth is, you always get ideas from a variety of sources, both inside the Labor Party and outside the Labor Party. That's always how it's been, and that's how it should be. And in terms of the development of those ideas, again, there is an appropriate place for consultation and working with stakeholders and sources of information. So the Productivity Commission is clearly a relevant one in that regard. We're now working with the states and territories on the further development of the disability insurance scheme, and that's how it should be.
Peter, was the decision to refer the disability insurance scheme to the Productivity Commission, a body you support and you would keep quite busy if you win government, actually make it harder for you to oppose it?
Well, Lyndall, I think it's a bit cute of Bob Carr and others to slap down Lindsay Tanner. This is a guy who got the call right on Julia Gillard. He got out before it really became a train wreck. I mean, he knew Julia Gillard very well. He knew about her leadership capacity, and he decided to jump ship before it really ran onto the rocks. And I think,
in fact, he jumped ship. He told Kelvin Rudd he was retiring before Julia Gillard took over.
Yeah, well, he wasn't inspired, obviously, enough to stick around under Julia Gillard, and I suppose he can explain his own reasons for that. But Lindsay Tanner made a significant contribution to the parliament. I don't think it's as easy as Bob Carr's comments of just dismissing him as another voice. And I think people really need to listen to what Lindsay Tanner has to say. I mean, he's trawled back through what's been a very difficult period of government for the Gillard government, the way in which they executed Kelvin Rudd. And I just think it says to all Australians that there's a lot of infighting that continues to take place on a daily basis, and how on earth can these people govern if they're fighting within to such an extent.
If I could go back to the question I asked, was the decision to refer the NDIS to the Productivity Commission and the Commission's decision that the scheme was doable make it harder for you to oppose?
Well, the Productivity Commission's an incredibly valuable body, and providing there's not political interference or manipulation in the way in which the government plucks the recommendations, then the Productivity Commission is an arm of government that should be used. But I think the point here that Lindsay's making is that the Labor Party's really lost its soul, and it's not just a question about the Productivity Commission or its worth, it's about the capacity of those people sitting around Julia Gillard to come up with the ideas and, most importantly, whether or not they have the ability to implement these policies. And that's been Labor's great failing, their inability to implement even the most basic of policies, and that's why people have seen the waste and mismanagement and why it's really aggravated Middle Australia over the course of the last 5 years.
Kelvin, if I could go to Mr Tanner's broad point that he says the Labor movement doesn't generate the sort of social reform ideas from within that it used to, do you think that's a valid criticism?
I don't, Lyndall. I think that ideas come from a range of sources, both within and without the Labor Party, and the political task is to get the best ideas and to be able to put those into practice. And the things that we've been putting into practice as a government since we were elected in 2007 go to our history as a party of the trade union movement, like the abolition of work choices, putting in place minimum employment standards, providing protections for truck drivers with safe rates, providing protections for textile clothing and footwear workers, providing protections for seafarers by insisting on minimum standards in relation to conditions on ships. All of those things come from our history as a Labor movement. And the ideas that we have for the future, putting a price on carbon, putting in place a national disability insurance scheme, the national broadband network, spreading the benefits of the mining boom through the mineral resources rent tax, all of these things show that we have a plan for the future and we're focused on the future, and we do have a view about the kind of Australia we want to see.
If I could ask you then about some of the things that Peter raised, and also Mr Tanner's point where he said that the reaction to what was happening in the government under Kevin Rudd was not justified. He says the move against Mr Rudd was poll-driven, and that some people who voted against him, who did not support him, now regret their decision. Do you believe that's the case?
Well, people who write books are of course able to talk about history, but in terms of what we're doing as a government, we are getting on with the task of being a good government. Lindsay Tanner rightly points to our stewardship through the global financial crisis, which enabled Australia to emerge in better shape than other comparable countries in Europe, the United States and so on. And the list of things that we have on the go now shows that we are a government which is very much focused on the future and planning for the future, rather than one which is concerned about the past.
Peter, your own side of politics occasionally receives advice from former MPs. Peter Costello writes a regular column. Peter Reith pushes you occasionally to do more on industrial relations, and even John Howard at a private forum extolled the virtues of the economy. Are you glad to get some free advice?
Well, the point is that we love them all, Linda. We're happy to take advice, even solicited advice we're happy to receive as well. So, look, I think people do have a significant contribution to make. People who have been in the parliament for a long period of time, there's no sense in just writing them off or saying that they have nothing to contribute. But Lindsay's point is more fundamental than that, which Kelvin identifies. I think he's quite critical of the way in which the Labor Party now is reactionary to the Greens and the Green movement, particularly in inner city seats. Obviously Kelvin's under pressure, but Lindsay himself lost his seat to Adam Bant at the by-election. I think it really strikes at the heart of the base and the philosophical values that the Labor Party once represented. And I think on many issues they're at sixes and sevens about whether they want to please the inner city audience at the risk of offending the outer metropolitan audience. And I think that's the great difficulty that they've got at the moment.
If we could go then to an issue on your own side of politics, Peter, that's the question of wheat deregulation. WA Nationals MP Tony Crook, who now sits in the Nationals party room, has announced he will support wheat deregulation. That's not a position that the Nationals are taking. The WA Liberals too have a policy position in favour of wheat deregulation. Do you think if it comes to a vote in Parliament that the WA Liberals who believe in wheat deregulation should vote for it?
Well, I think it's always good for political parties to have a united position on these issues. From time to time, as we've shown since Federation, individuals will have their own views and they'll exercise their right as an individual member of Parliament, but obviously it's better if people are able to arrive at a consensus position. I've found actually one of the most enlightening periods in Parliament is the way in which the party room operates. I think the party room is an opportunity for people to express their individual views. It might be outside of the corporate or the leadership view. My view has always been that express your view within that context and present a united public face, and I think that's what the public expect as well, but in the end people will make their own individual decisions.
Kelvin, it's not yet clear whether the government will have the numbers to get this legislation if it puts it to a vote through the lower house of the Parliament. Would you be looking to entice some of those WA Liberal MPs who support wheat deregulation over to your side?
Well, certainly we'd hope so, Lyndall. It's very significant, A, that Tony Crook represents an electorate of wheat farmers and is in direct contact with those people. And secondly, that in 2008 the opposition supported wheat deregulation. Regrettably, since Tony Abbott has become leader, their default position has always been no. It's just been knee-jerk opposition, and that has run into political reality, the real world. And the last sitting week we saw it in the case of the super trawler, where their position in support of the super trawler was directly opposed to the interests and comments of recreational fishermen and commercial fishermen, and here they're adopting a position which is opposed to the interests of Western Australian wheat farmers.
If I could ask you another quick question about your own side of politics, Peter Dutton. Bruce Scott has announced he'll recontest his seat of Maranoa. It was one of those that Barnaby Joyce was eyeing for a possible move to the lower house. If Senator Joyce wants to move to the lower house, should he consider contesting Maranoa?
Well, firstly, Lyndall, I'm very pleased that Bruce Scott's made this announcement. I think he is one of the wisest heads, the most experienced people in the federal parliament, and I think he still has a significant contribution to make, so I congratulate he and Joan on this decision, and I hope that he's successful at that pre-selection. I'd be very surprised if Barnaby contested that pre-selection. I think Bruce obviously has significant support within his own community, and I think he's got a lot to contribute in the next parliament, and I hope that he's given that opportunity.
Kelvin, it's one of the points that Lindsay Tanner made in an interview this morning, that perhaps the Rudd government suffered from some problems of inexperience. Is it worthwhile hanging on to really experienced MPs?
Well, I think you need to have a balance, Lyndall. I think that there is a place for experience, and if a political party has got experienced people in its ranks, that's an advantage. But there's also, you need to have renewal from time to time, and you need to be able to provide opportunities for newer and younger people to have a go as well.
And that's where
What about you, Kelvin? You're experienced. Are you coming back to the front bench, or what's happening?
Watch this space.
They could do with your help, mate.
Well, we might leave it there. We'll leave that as a question for another time. Peter Dutton and Kelvin Thomson, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Please be with us at the same time tomorrow. Good night.